Hi everyone, welcome to Mission Imagination. Today I am pleased to welcome Professor Ricardo Hausmann. Professor Hausmann is one of the world's foremost authorities on economic development and growth strategies. Since establishing the Harvard Growth Lab in 2006, Professor Hausmann has led more than 50 research initiatives across nearly 30 countries, directly influencing development policies worldwide. Today, we will explore how insights from his research can foster innovation and promote sustainable economic growth. Professor Hausmann, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So let's jump right in. Could you take me through what specific question or what specific problem you were thinking about where you found that the current economic framework was ill-fitted to talk about economic growth?
Yes, I spent a good part of the 1990s being the chief economist of the Inter-American Development Bank. And in those days, I thought that if you got the macro right, you opened up the economy, growth would take care of itself. And I soon realized that many countries were making enormous progress in stabilizing the macro and open their economies, but growth was not anywhere near where I thought it should have been. So I thought that there was something very big that we were missing. And that's what led me to think that maybe we should think about your economics in a slightly different way.
And this is where you came up with the economic complexity framework. Could you take us through intuitively how you came up with this framework?
Well, I thought that the most important thing in production is not capital, human capital, labor, etc., the standard way in which economists split up the world, but that the fundamental ingredient is know-how. That is, companies do the things they know how to do. Countries do the things they know how to do. And then you have to ask yourself the question, what is this substance, this know-how? Where is it? How is it? How does it grow? And in thinking about that, you know, with colleagues, and I thought that maybe the way to think about the growth of knowledge, how could knowledge grow if we're no smarter than Adam Smith or than Newton or than Einstein? How is it that knowledge grows while our brains don't grow? And the idea there is that knowledge grows because you put different bits of knowledge in different heads, so that the whole knows more because individuals know different. Not because individuals know more, but because individuals know different. So it's the division of knowledge that allows for the growth of knowledge of the collective, if you want. The growth of collective knowledge. But then if you want to use that knowledge, you have to bring sort of Humpty Dumpty back together again. You have to reconnect that knowledge. So in the process of reconnecting that knowledge, you create human networks. Some of them we call firms. So, you know, in a firm, somebody has to know about accounting, somebody knows how finance, human resource management, production, procurement, marketing, branding, contracts, taxes. So you have to span the whole knowledge set that allows that company to do what it does. So in bringing that knowledge together again, you have these increasingly complex human networks of cooperation, not only in firms, but in value chains that cooperate and so on, and then an international division of labor and the international division of knowledge and so on. So that's in my mind, my own individual breakthrough in how to think about the economy.
Yeah. Could we simplify it a little bit more? So I know, for example, you used the Scrabble, the game of Scrabble, to explain this better. So could you perhaps take us through the Scrabble game that you usually present to help us understand, in a very simplified term, what it really means when we talk about economic complexity and having capabilities and so on and so forth?
So imagine that each one of these units of knowledge is like a letter. And when you string these letters together to make a product, that's like a word. So capabilities are like letters, and products, the output of production, is like words. So very clearly you realize that the more letters you have, the more differentiated the letters that you have, the more words you can put together, and the longer the words you can put together. So in some sense, the process of growth is this process of expanding capabilities at the letter level and the ability to connect them, if you want. But you are going to observe it in a growing diversity of the things that you're able to do, and in a growing, if you want, complexity of the things that the longer the words you're able to do. And that's how we think about the growth process.
So if we were to expand that analogy further, would it be, for example, for countries and perhaps for policymakers, the whole idea is to diversify their capabilities, to have more complex letters so that you can form more words?
Yes, that is, you want to make sure you get more letters in, and that you allow those letters to reconnect, right? And now, there is a natural chicken and egg problem that you face. Because if you say you want to diversify, we are here in Switzerland, you want to diversify into making watches. Well, to make watches, you need watchmakers. But how do you become a watchmaker in a country that doesn't yet make watches, right? So you have this chicken and egg problem. You would need to have watchmakers to make watches, but you don't have watchmakers because you don't make watches. So that means that you're going to be struggling with missing letters every time you try to make a new word. How do you get that missing letter in? And you wish you could go to things that don't have too many missing letters. So this gives the idea that in this Scrabble world, some things are few capabilities away, few chicken and egg problems away, while others are more chicken and egg problems away. And we have shown that countries tend to move from where they are in this, if you want, knowledge space, to things that are in what Stu Kaufmann called the adjacent possible. So we try to visualize what things are in the adjacent possible of your current capabilities, so that you can assess which things are more feasible given what you already know. And you can design paths of how you're going to get from A to B, but in a way that every time you're not putting yourself the challenge of solving too many chicken and egg problems at the same time.
So that's very interesting. So what you're saying is there are specific opportunities when you're talking about the adjacent fields. Can you take us a little bit to that? So for example, how would a country with, let's say, arguably a low capability, maybe not as many diverse set of letters, how could they then make that leap, have that adjacent, diversify themselves, expand their capabilities?
Sure. Let's take a country like Finland. Finland used to be poor at one stage, say early 20th century, and they had a lot of wood, they had a lot of trees. So you'd say, well, David Ricardo would have said, you have a comparative advantage in wood, so focus on that. But in order to cut the wood, they needed, tools and machines to cut wood. And so, the machines would break down, etc. So they would have to repair them. Eventually, they became good at machines that cut wood. Now, from the machines that cut wood, you can move to machines that cut other things, because the world is not only made out of wood. So you go machines that cut other things. And from machines that cut in general, they move to automated machines that cut, because cutting everything by hand can be either boring or imprecise. So from automated machines that cut, they move to automated machines, because after all, there's more to life than just cutting. Right. And from automated machines, they ended up in Nokia, right? And interestingly, from Nokia, which was a cell phone, they couldn't make the leap to the smartphone. It was kind of like more farther away. So you see, you can go from just having wood to making a lot of things by just going to the next thing.
So your discussion about Finland, you're giving an example of Finland, is very interesting, going from wood cutting all the way up to Nokia. To what extent was this shift of composition of different types of activities in Finland because of the private sector? And how much of it was the public sector?
Well, I find that if you want to go back to Scrabble, the private sector can buy things in markets and put them together. And I like to call the things that you can buy in markets they are like consonants. But there are many things that you cannot buy in markets because they're public goods. You can go to the market and buy a car, but the road on which the car goes, the traffic lights, the traffic signs, the traffic rules, the traffic cops, all those things enable the use of that technology. A car with all those things is not very useful. There's no roads for you to drive in. There's no way to organize traffic. So every technology is some combination of things you can buy in markets, consonants, and things that you cannot buy in markets because they're public goods, call them vowels. And in most languages, every word has a mix of consonants and vowels. So the public sector and the private sector are very strongly complementary. It's not one versus the other. It's one and the other. You need both. And in the process of innovation, you start by precisely, you want to have the emergence of things that don't yet exist. And the things that don't yet exist are full of market failures. You have these coordination failures, these chicken and egg problems that we talked about, the watchmaker and the watch factory, right? So you need to solve those coordination problems. Any new technology will need some public goods that were not developed because that technology was not there. If you want electric vehicles to happen, people will need assurances that whenever they run out of electricity, they'll be able to charge their car. How do you assure them that they can get electricity in the same way as you assure them right now that they can get gasoline wherever they drive? So that's a public good. So every technology will require combinations of public goods that the government has to make sure are there. So that means that the governments have to be in very deep connection with the processes that are happening in their society so that the public sector can complement with public goods, with the vowels, the possibilities that can be done with the growing number of consonants out there.
So let's talk a little bit about developing economies. Can you take us through how this would work, specifically if, let's say, they prefer to have some sort of innovation policy that promotes diversification?
Well, I think it's very context specific, and you have to know developing economies are extremely diverse among them. You have to ask yourself the question, who are going to be the agents of change? So, a typical strategy is to make yourself attractive to foreign direct investment. Foreign companies are companies who know how to do things that your country may not be able to do yet. So you may attract the innovation by attracting a company that's going to be able to make in your country the things that you don't make. And so a lot of the innovation might be directed at attracting foreign companies in new areas. And that's all. At the moment you start the conversation with foreign companies, they will say, I'm going to need A, I'm going to need B, there's something about the ecosystem that's missing, can you fix that? And it's going to be determined by whatever that initiative is. But there are other agents of change in the economy. We also find that conglomerates or large corporations might be important agents of change. The way Japan diversified and the way Korea diversified was not because they got new firms in new areas, but they got their keiretsus, their chaebols, their conglomerates to diversify internally. And that's one form of diversification because it starts inside a company that has financial capital, it has managerial capital, it has reputational capital, it knows how to do business in the area, and they are the ones who are leading the diversification process. So that's a different path. And then there is policies that are a little bit more open to startups and to initiatives. I think startups require a very, very delicate ecosystem. It's typically it developed late in the process in Silicon Valley in California. So it's not the way the US started the process. The US started the process in large corporations, say like AT&T, Bell Labs, that it was inside a conglomerate, if you want. But I think that creating an ecosystem for startups is great, but there you have to solve the problem, how do you inject risk capital into these ventures, and how do you find a way to monetize the capital at the end? And these things in the US happen through mergers and acquisitions at the end, or through initial public offerings in the stock market. And so what has been difficult is to find ways out of the process. We even have, in many developing countries, we don't have a lot of private equity. And private equity is also a way out of it. So creating the ecosystem for startups is just one way to do it, but not necessarily the easiest way.
Yeah. I'd like to pick up on the fact that you talk about the different agents of change. And you talk about having foreign direct investment, a robust innovation ecosystem for startups and entrepreneurs. But also I'm wondering, in this digital age, we have the ability to link to different networks of knowledge. To what extent can this also be something that policymakers in specific countries can be part of, so that they start being part of the knowledge network and they can then diversify, or at least help their private sector to diversify into areas and capabilities that they are interested in expanding to?
Well, yes, there's, first of all, meetings like this one at WIPO, where innovation policy experts of different countries are able to meet, they're able to compare notes, they're able to learn from each other. That's very important. There's a very interesting source of diversification that I think many developing and especially middle-income countries don't use much, which I think is very powerful. When we think of FDI, foreign direct investment, we're thinking of knowledge coming in, but we typically measure as money coming in. But what's really important is the knowledge, not the money. Now, suppose that instead of you attracting a foreign company that comes in with money, you go out and buy a foreign company that knows how to do something you don't know how to do. When Google realized that they didn't know how to do video streaming on the web, they just went out and bought YouTube. Right? So if you don't know how to do something, you may buy a company that knows how to do it, and then you integrate it into your ecosystem. So outward foreign direct investment that enhances your set of capabilities or that of your private sector is also an important source of diversification. And let me say that AI, we're all fearful of AI, but one of the things that AI does is it makes knowledge much more accessible to many more places. And I think we need to figure out how to make AI into a catalyst of innovation.
This has been a very informative session, and I hope our audience will feel the same way. I think before we wrap up, I'd like to ask a couple of rapid fire questions. The top 3 important advice for policymakers.
Number 1, you have to be deeply embedded with the productive sector, whether it's private companies, state-owned enterprises, startups, etc. You have to be embedded because the problems are many and you have to have the capacity to identify them. And number 2, you have to have the capacity not just to identify where the problems are, but to solve them. So public-private integration is very important, but the next problem you're going to face, which is harder than public-private coordination, is public-public coordination. Because you're going to identify problems in your Ministry of Industry or in your Ministry of Competitiveness or whatever the name of your ministry, but where the solution space lies in other ministries or in other government entities that don't necessarily respond to you. So this has to be an all-government effort, and you have to develop mechanisms for interministerial coordination.
So making informed decisions and having coordination.
Yeah, and finally, you have to be very clear. You're not trying to improve on an index. You own the ultimate goal, and your ultimate goal is innovation, your ultimate goal is growth, and that is what your North Star should be. I see many governments that fall in love with some index, the International Competitiveness Index or whatever. They're focused on improving on the index and not on competitiveness itself or on growth itself or on innovation itself. So I say own the goal, own the problem, not the solution of the moment.
And then what are your top 3 feedback for the private sector?
Your company is characterized by its capabilities, not its products. You have to ask yourself, what are all the things I need to master in order to be very good at what I'm doing? And then ask yourself the question, given what I have mastered, what other things I could be doing with this set of capabilities if I were to expand them in one direction or another? And that's what is going to allow you to reinvent your company, to reinvent yourself, because you're always building on your capabilities, but adding something else to them.
Professor Hausmann, thank you for joining us here on Mission Imagination and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone for joining us for this fascinating discussion. Don't forget to subscribe to the WIPO channel for more inspiring videos that showcases how innovation and creativity are shaping our world and our lives. Until the next time.